I recently finished the Elucidian Starstriders for Warhammer 40k's Kill Team. They're the boarding party for the Rouge Traders, and it's 5 dudes that look like this and this. They're really cool guys, and I really enjoyed painting them. I didn't get everything I wanted done. There's a couple of mistakes that were obvious that I didn't notice until after I went to edit the footage. That's the way it happens around here. But there was only 5 models, and this box clearly has 10 models. What happened to these guys? Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. Today I'm going to tell you what happened to the other 5 guys, and by tell you I mean I'm going to paint them. Like I said, I have these guys. I didn't paint them last week because I wanted to make the project a bit more manageable, and I wanted to really focus on the paint scheme of the original guys, which look like this. And so now that I have the scheme down and I'm relatively happy with the way it looks, I wasn't sure about the green on green. I'm going to take the lessons that I've learned here and apply them to these models. The issue is, of course, that these models are pretty different from the Voidsmen, the regular grunty dudes that you just saw. We have this assassin lady. We have this Electro Priest dude. I don't know if that's actually his name, but he looks pretty tech priesty to me, so we're going to go with that. We have the Doctor with lots and lots of scary scalpels on her fingers. Since this person is clearly a battlefield medic, they will be sporting a decent amount of white. So already we're diverging. And of course, we have a doggo, which he's adorable, and there's no way I'm going to make him green so that he looks like he's part of this squad. Almost forgot to mention the Rouge Trader, the boss of this entire outfit. The point is, each of these are going to have a very different look, at least, you know, in the materials of the clothing that they're wearing, but I still want them to be part of this squad. So I'm going to see about diverging from this paint scheme in ways that make each of these individuals stand out while still making them part of the larger team. It shouldn't be too tricky. I know what the major parts of the armor should look like. Let's see if we can combine them in a meaningful way. So we'll start with the usual, which is a Basecoat Glaze. Basecoat glazing for these 5 models is a bit different from what I'm used to. I'm used to picking a specific color and then applying it to all the models in the kit, but because these models are so different, they have different functions, I took a risk and I decided to use different colors for each of them. Colors that maybe denote or indicate their function, or maybe link that function to the wider Warhammer 40k universe, where that's possible. So, it doesn't apply in the first case. I tried doing this with the canine, Canid, the Pooch. He has this dopamine pincher-esque look, so I went with a dark brown. In this case, Army Painter's Oak Brown. Sorry, it's really hard to see the label. It's been used a little bit. It was a nice thin glaze of this, maybe 50-50, well, less than 50-50. A little bit more paint than water, but close to 50-50. And I ended up using 2 coats on this guy to make sure he had nice coverage, and he still had a bit of the highlights from the undercoat sticking out. I made sure to apply this in all the parts of the dog's fur, his skin, I don't know if it's furry or not, basically staying away from the armor plates on his back and on his chest. For the medic, I went with kind of a more classical approach to medics. In other words, I used white, and that's kind of what I meant by trying to tie in their color scheme to their wider function, or their function in the wider world of Warhammer 40k. So since this person was a medic, I went with a thin glaze of Army Painter's Matte White I don't usually start with matte white as my undercoat or as my base coat glaze, typically because I want the base coat to be a little darker than the eventual highlights, but because I'm doing kind of very specifically the quickest paint that I can manage while still doing it with a decent amount of fidelity or making it look decent, I went ahead with this, and I'm hoping that this little subsequent stages make it look nice so that it reads as white but still has shadows and highlights. I don't know if that'll be successful, but I use white. I applied this white over what essentially is the lab coat, including the sleeves. I avoided things like the boots and the armor panels, or there's a shoulder pad, there's a couple of gauntlets, and there's a helmet that I didn't use this for. Now, the Assassin's an interesting case because I wasn't sure what color to paint them at. I mean, an Assassin can be any number of colors. Typically, they're black or dark gray, but I've already got dark gray picked out for the color of the leather clothing items, like boots, gloves, that sort of thing. So I didn't really want to use all leather on this model. I wanted to show the difference between the bodysuit and the leather boots. In this case, this model has really long, like thigh-high boots, so I didn't want to blend that in with the rest of her skin suit. So I picked a color that I hadn't used very much before, Hydra Turquoise. It's a very nice, very pleasant teal. It's a nice mixture of green and blue. I really like the way it looks, and I wish I used it more, but I haven't. And more importantly, I think that it works well. It complements the green that I will eventually use on the armor plates. I don't know this for a fact, but we'll find out, right? At any rate, I added this to all the body parts that were skin suit. In this case, I included the gloves because there wasn't a lot of turquoise, and because this model has a lot of like long boots and long gloves, so I may not keep the gloves this color. I may go back to add it to the dark leather, kind of the dark gray. I haven't decided yet. I'll figure that out in the next couple of steps. For my Electro Meister, he is, I guess, a lightning dude from the Adeptus Mechanicus, or at least Mechanicus trained. I wanted to tie him into the Mechanicus universe, I guess. And so the Mechanicus, I always see them wearing some kind of variation on red, usually like a rusty red or like a combination of red and orange. And I didn't have a color that could lend itself to that very well. So I used a blend of these two colors. This is Troll Slayer Orange from Citadel Color, and this is Pure Red from Army Painter. I wanted this to be an orange, I wanted this to be a red with an orange tint, and I don't know that I succeeded here. It looks pretty orange to me, but I think I can make that correction in subsequent steps, using washes to bring back a kind of more reddish tint. I don't know if I'll be successful, but I want to give it a try. At any rate, I added this to this person's robe tunic thing. Yeah, basically it's everything except, like, so he's wearing shoulder armor and a helmet, and so anything from that point down, he's wearing like a hardened leather tunic or a robe or something. So that's the part of the model that got this color. And finally, we have Elucia Vane, which is the Rouge Trader herself. She's the boss of this outfit, and so I wanted to make sure that she had a color that indicated her status. And since she's the boss, I went with Xarius Purple. Purple often being associated with royalty or nobility. She's a Rouge Trader. I think there's some kind of nobility thing happening there, so I went with purple on this model. And so I used the purple in all the spots, again, that were not the armor. And so in this case, she's wearing a tunic, kind of like the Electro Meister. It goes down to her knees. her sleeves. She has like a face mask that she's wearing, and it didn't really look like armor, although it's kind of serving as armor, but it could just be like a veil to hide her face. So I went with purple there, and of course the big plumage she's wearing on her helmet, that needed a dash of purple as well. This model was a little different in that she was using another cloth element that I didn't want to make dark leather. And so since I haven't gotten to the dark leather at this point yet, I went ahead and did note this or pick these details out as lace. White lace in this case. And so I used the matte white to hit her gloves. She's got these ruffles on her wrists that tell me that it's kind of lacy, but on her backside, she's wearing looks like a corset, or the backside of a corset. So I'm guessing her armor, her chest plate, is strapped to her as a corset, and it binds up in the back. So that corset element has to be fabric. So I picked that out as white as well, which means that when I add the armor color, it's going to be a kind of a weird combination of three colors. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot. So that does bring me to the last major step of the Basecoat Glaze, and that's hitting the armor with the color that I'm hoping will tie this spectrum of models to the other 5 units, which is Angel Green. A nice glazed base coat of this over anything that's going to be armor will do the job. So for the pooch, he's got a harness where the back and the chest is armored. The medic has a helmet, some Edward Scissorhands things happening in one of his hands. So, basically shoulder plates, anything that looks like it's going to be armored. I went ahead and added this color. It looks nice, but I can't really tell at this point whether it's going to do the job of uniting it with the other 5 models until I do kind of all the other steps. All right, here are the models, and you can see what I was talking about earlier about choosing different colors for each of the major functions, and I'm not sure how much I like this approach. I think there's maybe too many colors in here, and there's not enough of the green armor to bring them back as a unified force with the Voidsman. But I'm not convinced that it's the wrong approach either. So I'm going to try just trusting the process. Let's just see how this turns out. As you can see, I've got the Doggo here. He is brown with that green armor. There's not much else going on with this guy. I should probably go back on here and add a few patches of dark gray, probably, just to give him a little bit of extra character. Here is that assassin that I was talking about, and I really like that color teal. I don't know how much I like it with the other colors. You can see how it's not bad next to that green, but next to that gray, I don't know. And that looks like to be an orc head. I haven't decided what to do with that yet. I've got the medic with a striking white lab coat, green armor, and gray boots. All the equipment is picked out in black, just like with all the other models. Here is the Electro Priest. He is this weird orange with the green. He kind of looks like an Eldar salamander, except he's weird looking in a different way. But yeah, same approach, except for instead of white with medic, I have orange. And I'm hoping that's going to look a little bit more red after I add some red wash over that. But that remains to be seen. And finally, we have the Rouge Trader herself. There are those striking white gloves. I'm hoping that makes it to the end. I'm not sure I'm loving the purple against the green, but again, I'm going to trust the process. Trust the process. And part of that process is to go to the next step of this painting process, which is the washing. For the washing, I started off with the main color, so that the color that seems to be different for each of these models. So since each of them had a different color, I used mostly a different color wash, although I did do some doubling up on some of them. So for example, the assassin, she's wearing this bright blue skin suit, and I thought about using a little bit of Army Painter's blue tone, but I thought I maybe just wanted to darken it down instead, to kind of blend in better with the large proportion of her body that's covered with that dark gray that will look more black than gray. So for her, instead of using the blue tone, I just went with Army Painter's dark tone. I made sure to water it down just a little bit, maybe 20% water to, to wash, just to make sure I didn't get too much coffee staining. Army Painter's quick shades, they can be a little thick and a little gloopy, and if you're not very careful, you can get coffee staining, but adding a little bit of water seems to do the job without affecting its ability to seep into the crevices. So I added that to the blue parts of her body, and as long as I was there, I went ahead and did the grape stuff, so the gloves, the boots, that sort of thing. The other model that got the same treatment with the dark tone was the Rouge Trader herself. She's wearing kind of a bright purple kind of cloth around her green armor. So rather than go with a purple tone, I just decided to go and darken it up a bit. I know some models I went darker, some of them I enhanced the color that was there. It was just kind of a gut feeling, and I think it looks okay, but the proof will be in the pudding when it's done. So yeah, I made sure to get all that stuff that was purple. I hit her with the dark tone that was a little watered down. She doesn't have very many gray parts, but she does have a prominent holster in the front, so I hit that with the dark tone as well. What I did do though is she's wearing a feather on her cap, because she's Yankee Doodle Dandy, and I wanted that to look, or at least feel, a little different from the purple outfit. So for that, I did use a bit of Army Painter's purple tone, just to emphasize the purpliness of that piece and make it different from the other parts of the outfit. For the Electro Meister, I went with Army Painter's red tone. Again, watered down, and I gave this model a couple of coats of this stuff because I wanted the red to show through. So it's pretty orange underneath, but that thin transparent layer of red over it, I think, makes it red enough to pass as an orange red. I might still need another coat or two of the red tone, but I'll get it there. I will. For my field medic, I went with Citadel Colors Soul Blight Gray. It's a nice shade to work with, except that I have noticed that it isn't nearly dark enough. It's almost there, but it's not quite there. It ends up being too blue, and it doesn't really show up very well. So I decided to add just a little bit of that watered down dark tone that I've been using, and that seems to have done a nice job. It darkened it up just a little bit without making it black, because black wash over white doesn't really look good to my eye. It looks dirty, and sometimes I want that. Most of the time over white armor or white parts of the model, that's not the look I'm going for, and I think this mixture is working well. It might be a little too dark, but I don't know. I have to play with it. It's nice to experiment on this. The last model that got the wash treatment was the Pooch, the canine. Our Doberman Pinscher friend got a generous coating of watered down mid-brown. That nuttiness, I think, was a nice compliment to his dark brown color. But before I added the wash, I made sure to give him a couple of different things, because this is skin, this is a dog. I gave him little gray spots, little gray patches. So not really spots, right? Not dots, but like patches over different parts of his body, just to kind of make it so that he has kind of a dual colored fur. And the other thing I did once that dried was that I went in with a kind of a pretty stiff dry brush, and it was very, very dry, and I very lightly went across his fur with it. In a consistent pattern, right? So I created this grain of fur before I added the wash, because I wanted the wash to kind of help blend it in with the paint that's underneath it. So this way, I think it looks like he's got fur, as opposed to he's just a block of brown with gray splotches. Here are my boys. They've got the washes all done, and some of them look pretty decent. Some of them need some work. We'll start with our canine friend here. I think the wash did him some good. Those gray spots, they didn't come out the way I wanted. They kind of look like they're coffee stains from the wash, but that's not really the case. You can kind of see one here on his haunches, see one here on his neck. Yeah, I may have to tweak that a little bit because I don't like the way that looks. It doesn't have the kind of character I wanted, but you know what? I'll address that in later stages. This was, let's call it a first pass. I was hoping to be more done with him than I am, but that's okay. I'll fix it. Our assassin is looking pretty darn awesome. I love the way the blue looks now. It's a lot less bright. I think it goes a little bit better, especially with the green with its own wash as well. And those leather boots, they look shiny and nice. Man, I really like that look. I have work to do on the base, the plinth she's standing on, and that orc head. I'm pretty sure that's an orc head that she's got by the hair. That should be interesting. And her own hair, I haven't decided what to do with that yet, but I'll get that in detailing stages. That's fine. Our Electro Meister doesn't look great. That wasn't quite the shade of red that I was looking for. It's still a little too orange, and at this point I'm kind of not sure what to do. I could go back and give him another coat of red. I might just have to do that because this looks orange and green, and orange and green is not a good look. I don't want a candy corn, well, maybe not candy corn, those candy corn pumpkins that you see during the Halloween holidays in the United States. It's kind of what it looks like, and I don't like it. I'm going to have to do something about it. So, more work for this guy. Our medic here is looking pretty sharp. I like the way the wash settled on the white, so the lab coat still looks white, but it's got some shadows on there. I like that. He's stepping on, or she's stepping on some kind of like alien thing, like an alien or a demon or some kind of thing. It looks like a dude with a horn on it. He's begging for his life, and I don't think she's got any cocktails to fix him, but maybe it's a big bag. Who knows? And finally, the Rouge Trader herself, looking sharp in purple. Not sure how I feel about this color. Maybe another pass with a dark wash to give her the same effect that the assassin has. It's a little too bright still. I want it a little, not dingier, just darker. So this probably needs another coat of dark wash or dark tone from Army Painter. But otherwise, looks okay. I haven't done any washing on the white gloves. You can see they're really, really, really white, as is her corset. I meant to add some of that stuff, but it dried up on me. That's what happens when you don't use a wet palette, but you don't want to really use wet palette with washes anyway. So I'll mix up another little batch and slap that on, and she'll look right as rain. So we've talked a bit about the washes. We've seen the results. Looks pretty okay. We've got some work to do, but that is also okay. The next step is to do some detailing once I fix all these issues that I've talked about. And the first part of detailing, I think, is going to be a little bit of dry brushing. The color selection for the dry brushing was pretty straightforward. I did something that I don't usually do, but I wanted to try it. So basically, I just mixed a little bit of white paint with the original paint of the model. So, for example, for Elucidian, I used some Xeris Purple from Citadel Color, mixed with some matte white from Army Painter, and I had a kind of a light coating of that over just some of the areas that I thought would be reflecting light more than other areas, right? So just kind of a highlight with the dry brush. This was a little challenging in terms of the technique or the actual physical application, because the models are kind of small and the surfaces they're difficult to get to. So you have to be careful, you have to be subtle, and you have to be okay with not applying too much paint. Yeah, so you're not going to have a ton of highlights with this approach, mostly because, again, it's a small surface area, but also a lot of these clothes, the tunics, have the embroidery that will eventually be the metallic silver color, so any highlights that you do on that stuff, they're not going to show up anyway, so it's kind of a weird deal, but I think it's worthwhile to go in and give it a shot anyway. I did the same thing with the Electro Meister, just added a little bit of white to the red that I was using. In this case was Daka Red, and that one's also even harder because he's got just flat surfaces, so it kind of hit him on the sides. May have messed up a little bit on some of it. I don't know. It looks kind of weird. The medic was a lot more straightforward. It was just white, and the trick there was to have enough coverage on the dry brush that it looks white without kind of whiting out the shadows. So it's kind of a weird balance to pick. I think I did okay with that one, but I'm not 100%. As for the assassin, the white with that turquoise that I used for her, it turned out kind of nice, but there's not a lot of area to use here. So basically it's just her chest, the tops of her chest, some of her shoulders, and that's basically it. The other parts that got a decent dry brush were the weapons and the equipment. In this case, I used a dry brush of paint mail metal, and so it was just kind of a light dry brushing on all those black, the flat black pieces, and I tried to bring the brush down the surface to kind of replicate what the sunlight would do. Yeah, there's reflected sunlight, or the reflected light from the environment that the model is in, but for just to keep things simple, I went with a downstroke, and I think it looks pretty decent. It does a nice way of giving the model a metallic appearance without taking away from its black nature. I kind of like the way that looks, and I use that technique with quite a lot of my projects. The other thing that I spent some time on dry brushing wise was to bring out the leatheriness of the leather. So as you know, the leather, I went in with a very dark gray and washed it over so it looks black. And before I put the dry brushes on, you couldn't tell them apart really. They were very similar. You could see a difference, but if you had to look really, really close, and that's not how you experience models anyway. So what I decided to do is something that I experimented with the previous models in this kit was to give them a brown highlight. So it's a dark gray, but I built up a highlight of two different colors. Started off with this dark stone. It is a dark brown. It's a very dark brown. You kind of can't tell it's brown until it's on your model, which is kind of a weird deal. I used to use it as a dark gray. It is not gray. It's brown. There's an earthiness there to it. At any rate, I used a light highlighting of this paint on the boots, the gloves, and holsters. Anything that was supposed to be leather and is reflecting some light and got a bit of this. Once that dried, I went over that with an even lighter dry brushing with leather brown from Army Painter. This was just an extra highlight for all those really kind of the highest of the highlights, and it gives it kind of a distressed leather look, which I kind of like. But more than anything else, it makes these materials look like leather, like it's been used, and the only way you could tell it's leather is by looking at the highlights. Oh yeah, it's brown. And it has the when it's all said and done, it has the impact of really differentiating the black weapons from the black leather pieces. Yeah, I like this approach. I'm going to use it, I think, with more of my models. And here's what my models look like once the dry brush has gone on. They're looking pretty decent. Nothing too stellar, but given that I haven't spent a ton of time on these, it's a pretty good result. You could see the blue, you can see the leather of that thigh-high boot. It is clearly a leather, but it's got those dark shadows. Did a little bit of highlight on that little tabard there. You can kind of see the sword. It's metallic but black, but it looks like I've seen plenty of use, and that edge is nice and sharp. I really like the way this is coming along. Here's my medic. Her coat looks pretty white to me. I think I like this approach of using the white dry brush over the white undercoat. I think I'm really enjoying this approach of using the white base coat with the kind of slightly darkened gray wash, and then going over it with a white dry brush. I think that gives the appearance of a white material while still giving us those easy kind of baked in shadows on that cloth. It's an easy way of getting it, and I think I'm zeroing in on my preferred technique. You can see its little friend here. It's got a mixture of like pinks and purples and grays. That is an interesting little critter, yeah, I'll bring it to life in the detail stage that comes next. Here's my Electro Meister, Master of Electricity, the Taser. And man, these highlights, you can kind of see there on the sides of that red thing, but there's not a ton happening. There's some on his shoulders. It's hard to kind of pick out. It's a weirdly shaped tunic. Did the best I could. But that equipment, look at that pouch. You could tell it's dark brown as opposed to black. Those gloves, and then you could see those little those Tesla coils on his back. They're metallic, but they're really dark. That gun looks really sweet. I like the way that turned out. Yeah. So a couple of pluses, maybe a minus on the red. Here is our pooch. He's not much changed from the last time. There's a little bit more dry brushing, but I didn't use like a big dry brush. I just used like a detail brush and just added a couple of like hashes on him to make him look a little bit more realistic as a pooch. And you can kind of see his face. There's a bit more definition there, where you can see he's got eyes, you can see the snout, you can see the outlines of the ears. I think he's looking pretty decent. And finally, our Rouge Trader herself. She's got that purple. She's rocking it. I did the purple highlights. They look okay. There's not a ton of surface area to play with, but I did make sure to touch up her white corset, so it didn't look dingy gray. It looked like white with shadows. Same thing on her gloves, and you'll notice that the feathers on her helmet, I don't know. It has kind of a red sheen that the tunic doesn't have. I used just a dry brush, a very light dry brush of red to differentiate that material from the rest of her outfit. I think that was a nice little touch. And finally, you can see her holster has that same brownish appearance that it didn't have before. But it does look like I forgot to metallicize her baton. I'll fix that before we get into the next step, which is overbrushing. So let's talk overbrushing. There's quite a bit of it on this project, but it's not quite overbrushing, much like the last batch, the 5 troopers. This was kind of a mix between overbrushing and just normal layer painting, and it's a result of kind of 2 things. So one of them is on the tunics, kind of the front of the tunics. There are these large kind of emblems that I wanted to pick out in a metallic silver, and they were pretty wide, and when you have a wide detail like that, overbrushing doesn't work as well because it relies on having a fairly dry brush. Not a dry brush, but just a drier layer brush. So the idea is you want to kind of touch the surface of it and leave some of that paint behind, but these surfaces were so wide that it really doesn't work. You have to have kind of a wetter brush, and at that point, it's basically just layer painting. Having said that, there are a few parts where that doesn't apply, where you can just overbrush. And here the line between overbrushing and edge highlighting kind of blurs, because it's essentially the same technique. It's just where you're applying it. Here, I wasn't applying it on edges. I was applying it on raised surface details. So there's a wiring on one of the helmets of the models, and so you kind of rub the edge of the brush over that wire, and so the silver metallic paint only gets left behind on that raised surface. but it relies on the surfaces being pretty elevated relative to the surface where it's lying on, and that wasn't always the case here. So even then, overbrushing was kind of challenging for these models, and I didn't notice the challenge on the other batch, and I don't know why. So basically what I'm saying is that the details on these 5 models were generally softer than on the other 5, and I don't know if that was an intent, a design decision, or it's just how it felt to me. It's subjective after all. Either way, it took care of all of that. It took a little bit of time, and you want to be careful with it because it's easy to kind of let your brush stray away from the surface you're trying to overbrush, and then you end up with silver metallic paint on a surface you didn't intend. When this happens, and it's going to happen, you want to clean that up immediately. You want to go kind of wash off the paint that you had on your brush, go back with it with a damp to wet brush. You don't want it dripping, but you want to have a bit of water left on the brush to rub away the metallic silver paint from where you don't want it. If you let it stay there for too long, that rubbing isn't going to work because you're using an overbrush, and so the paint is relatively dry already, so it'll dry on that surface pretty quick. So make sure you wet your brush, clean off any excess, and keep trying. Otherwise, you're going to end up having to repaint the surface that you didn't intend to get silver metallic, and it's kind of a pain. So, work clean at this point. As far as the other details are concerned, there weren't a ton. I think most of the work on kind of bringing out the details was done with either dry brushing or with the overbrushing, but there were a few things that were kind of left over. Think, the red glowing eyes. Maybe there's a light up button somewhere, like the Electro Meister has little baubles on his helmet. I made sure to go back in there, and I used a couple of different Army Painter speed paints because these are very nice and saturated, but they're also very transparent. So when you treat the surface before you apply these paints, like having a very nice dense white undercoat, these paints will read very differently from your normal red. So for the red glowing eyes, it's going to look different than the red tunic that the Electro Mage is wearing. It's just there's a weird effect I haven't really been able to put my finger on with Army Painter speed paints. But it's a very nice effect for anything that's going to be like in emissive lighting. So say glowing eyeballs or an LED light, a computer panel, that sort of thing. So I made sure to hit all the models that had these details with kind of a mixture of these kinds of paints. Inclusive of this is the power packs on most of these models. There's a little window, and I made sure to pick that out with some white, and then once that dried, I went over it with just a very little bit of Citadel Color Null Oil, and what that does is it leaves kind of an outline of a darker white kind of around the edges of that little yellow, of that little panel. And once that dries and you apply a speed paint to it, it gives it, it kind of enhances the glowing effect. There'll be a slightly darker and then a slightly brighter piece to it. It's a nice quick way of getting an emissive light without having to spend a ton of time with a bunch of glazing and layers and all that kind of good stuff. Army speed paints, they're great for lighting effects. I wrapped up this phase of the project with just kind of filling in any other random details that you might find. Like the medic has a little demon thing growing out of the base. You want to make sure to add a few details there, like maybe any fangs, any teeth, eyeballs, that sort of thing. Same thing with the assassin. She's holding an orc's head clutched tight on her left or right arm or right hand. You want to make sure that you don't want to detract from the rest of the model, so you don't want to make it too detailed, but it's a centerpiece of, it's a focal point for the model, so you want to make sure to pick out the eyes, pick out any teeth. There's a big old tongue hanging off out of the orc's mouth. You want to hit that with some interesting paint just to make sure that there's an appropriate amount of focus on that part of the model. And of course, this is the time in the project where you correct any mistakes that you may have made. Maybe spots where your brush didn't quite reach, so you want to get in there and fix that detail. Or maybe there's a place where you accidentally rubbed a brush with one color paint over the paint that you actually wanted. This is also the time where you want to fix all of those little mistakes, because you want to make sure your model looks as good as it possibly can within a reasonable amount of time and a moderate skill level. The Elucidian Starstriders. Here they are in all their painted, well, we won't call it glory, but they're still pretty good looking. For the amount of time I spent on them and the moderate skill level that I can bring to bear, they don't look half bad. They're pretty colorful, pretty varied. They're all pretty different from each other, but they have a unified look. Sort of. I don't know that I've necessarily succeeded in my goal of making these unified, but it's come pretty close. We'll start off with this guy. He is our Electro Meister. Sorry, not mage, that's heresy. Electro Meister with his shiny little gun, his iPad showing some stuff that he needs to go shoot with electricity, in his red tunic. Kind of insinuating that he is a student of Mars. Long hail the machine god. Here we have our medic, or as the box calls him, the rejuvenant adept. I don't know how much rejuvenation he or she is going to be doing on the battlefield. Certainly this little demon critter looks worse for wear after his treatment. But maybe the rejuvenation juice in that handy-dandy little med pack there, it isn't properly calibrated for the Nurgling or Nurgle-infested guy. Our adept is wearing the sharp white robes that is still apparently 40,000 years into the future, so very common for the medical professional. You can see here on his arm, he's got a little wrist display. He's got those Edward Scissorhand things happening there on his gauntlet. Doesn't look half bad, just don't look at him too closely. Here we have our assassin, or the Death Cult Executioner. Yikes. I don't believe she's going to be a hit at the next party, but when the party's all said and done, she can probably clear the room pretty quickly. She's wearing those nice bright blue I guess body stocking, leotard, whatever it's called. She's got a shiny metal sword. She's got what I can only assume are poison darts that this poor unfortunate orc had the misfortune of getting in the way of. He's had a better day, I'm pretty sure. Here is Elucidian. She is the Rouge Trader herself, clad in royal purple with the bright deep green that is common with the rest of her household. Yeah, let's call it household. It's probably a retinue. Maybe that's a better word for it. Her group, her team, her erstwhile explorers. They're here to take your booty. Not in that sense, but in the other sense, in that she wants to take your stuff. And she's got a big old pistol and a shiny baton with which to do it. Kind of hard to see under her helmet there. She's got this bright red glowing eye, and she's got a pretty noticeable gem here. It looks like it's lit from within, and that corset that is not at all restricting her air passages. It's got to be tough to do battle when you're wearing a corset, but I wouldn't know. It's not my jam. And last but not least, we've got Fido here, the canine. He is an ever-loyal watchdog, and because he's so loyal, he gets to wear a little bit of that armor that is so common to this retinue. Perhaps the question about whether I succeeded in creating a unified squad of 10 Rouge Trader people is here, where we have the full 10 members of the retinue. We have the 5 elites that I painted in this project, and we have the 5 combatants, or the troopers, that I painted in a previous project. And I think I'll go ahead and say I like these results. Yes, these characters in the back row, they're pretty varied in their color, but when they're all in a group like this, you can see how similar they are. And so with this project, I think I'm going to go ahead and just give myself a tentative pat on the back and say that yes, indeed, I have succeeded in creating a unified squad of Elucidian Starstriders, even while giving each of these staffers a distinctive look all of their own. I've got to say, when I first started the project, I was pretty confident that I was going to be able to pull this off, that the solid, dark, bright green common to the metal parts, the hard parts of the armor, was going to be enough to unify them. But as I worked on this second 5-man detachment, I guess, it became a lot less clear. The differences between the characters, or the models, they seemed to overpower the green armor that was attempting to unify them as a single unit. But now that I see them all together, I think I've succeeded, and I like the results. So if you're struggling to come up with a unified theme for your Elucidian Starstriders, maybe give this one a shot. If for no other reason, how often do you get to paint an adorable yet bloodthirsty hound for your Imperial forces? Thank you so very much for watching. This has been Your Average Bear Gaming. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.